Parade Day. So glad that you all are here. We kind of treat this Sunday morning as a little bit of a kind of like tailgating for the Pride Parade. So we're gonna sing some songs. David will be up a little later. But as you're coming in, I want to invite you to stand and sing with me. Mercy sings me the promise of your love. I'm reminded of how far we've come. You're the one that my heart's beating for. I can feel the rising of the sun. Mercy sings me the promise of your love. I'm reminded of how far we've come. You're the one that my heart's beating for. Mercy sings me the promise of your love. I'm reminded of how far we've come. You're the one that my heart's beating for. My heart is beating for. My heart is beating for. Thank you again so much for being here, and we really want to give you some space this morning. And maybe if you didn't know, the Pride Parade's today. I want to invite you to join us there, and it's a great opportunity for us to show up together in ways that we don't often get to show up together. And so for those of you who are here, we get to experience this together and then go experience that parade together. This is a song that we've done for a while, but it talks about God being an ally. And so, again, in whatever way you're coming in this morning, I want to invite you into the next few moments together. Just when I thought I was forgotten, you came and called me by name. You showed me that I'm never forsaken. I'm awake, love for me, my protector, my helper, friend and my king, my defender, my treasure. You're my safety, all the welcome in your arms, because love is who you are. Nothing can take you away. I adore you, all that you are. I adore you. Pour out my heart, you adore me. Just as I am, you are God. You are God, my ally. You stand in heaven undefeated, and yet you never leave my side. You walk with me through every season. You're the reason I'll be alright. My protector, my helper, friend and my king, my defender, my treasure. You're my safety, all the welcome in your arms, because love is who you are. Nothing can take you away. I adore you for all that you are. I adore you. Pour out my heart, you adore me. Just as I am, you are God. You are God, my ally. When the voice is rising against me, it's your name I can call on. When they say I'm not in your family, it's your love that calls me home. When the voice is rising against me, it's your name I can call on. When they say I'm not in your family, it's your love that calls me home. We adore you for all that you are. We adore you and pour out our hearts. You adore us just as we are. You are God. You are God. We adore you for all that you are. We adore you. Pour out our hearts. You adore us just as we are. You are God. You are God, our ally. When the voice is rising against me, it's your name I can call on. When they say I'm not in your family, it's your love that calls me home. When the voice is rising against me, it's your name I can call on. When they say I'm not in your family, it's your love that calls me home. We adore you, all that you are. We adore you. Pour out our hearts, you adore us. Just as we are, you are God. You are God, our ally. Again, thank you so much for being here. I want to give you space to greet the people around you, to say hello. and then we'll continue with the morning.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. If you are brand new with us, welcome. You picked an exciting Sunday to join us, although one that's probably, as you can see, going to be a little light in this room, because it is the Pride Parade today, and a lot of our folks are already over there getting ready to participate in that. I'll have a couple more details on that in a moment, but real quick, let's go through the normal housekeeping things. If you want to get connected here at Watershed, the digital connection card is your starting point. That QR code will actually take you to a page called our Connect and Learn page on our website, where absolutely everything going on here at Watershed is listed. We have like a little carousel for each month. It's got all the events and things like that. And then at the top of the page, you'll find a link for the connection card, small groups, and just everything. So if you fill out that connection card, you'll hear from us. It's kind of a simple, almost anonymous way to let us know that you were here and to get your questions answered. So we would encourage you to do that. And there's just a lot of ways to connect here. And so you'll learn about all of those, not only in the coming weeks, but at the other end of that QR code. So I would encourage you to do that. So the Pride Parade. So this is a pretty exciting Sunday for us. In fact, sometimes, and I know that my energy, like I'm kind of just like an even-keeled, monotone sort of guy, so I'm not the right hype guy for this. But Pride Parade is kind of like our Super Bowl, and this service on Pride Sunday is kind of like our tailgate party, but like in a wholesome way. And so we're celebrating that today. If you are here and you hadn't already made plans to participate, that is okay. We would invite you to do that in whatever way you feel comfortable with. The simplest and kind of most straightforward way is to walk or march with us. And so if that is something that interests you, we're going to try to end this service at a timely time so that people have plenty of time to get over there, grab some food if they need to. Our float is currently being set up at Tryon and 11th. If you're familiar with Aerial Charlotte, which is like the cool like flying in the air with ribbons thing, I think that's what it is. I could be completely wrong about that. But it's called Aerial Charlotte. We're right in front of that. And so if you want to just participate, again, you don't have to have signed up. You can just show up and walk with us during the parade. There's a picture of kind of what it looks like and what you're looking for. But it's going to be a great time. But if that is not how you're wanting to sweat this afternoon, there are other options. One of them is just, finding the shadiest spot that you can possibly find along Tryon and cheering everyone else on. That is what my family and I typically do. I've got young kids, and that's a great way for them to participate. But if you have any questions, I will be available in the back following the service if you have any curiosities about what this looks like, if you've never done it before. But we would love to have as many folks join us as possible, and it's going to be a good time. All right, two other quick things. I'm going to be back up here in a couple minutes because today we're doing a Q&A kind of in lieu of a sermon. So if you have questions about the series that we've been in, called The Worst Ideas God Never Had, if you have questions kind of along that theme, kind of things that maybe once made sense or were sort of handed down to you within the Christian tradition, but maybe don't make sense or don't resonate or just you can't wrap your head around them anymore. And specifically, if you have questions related to the intersection of faith, spirituality, and queerness, gender identity, things like that, then I would encourage you to, as soon as my phone number pops up on the screen here in a few minutes, you can just start texting them in, and we'll answer some questions during our time together, and then we'll get out to the parade. And then last thing, talk about this every week, but just want to express our gratitude to those of you who support and uphold what we do through your time, but also through financial resources as well. Try to make this super simple for everyone. I mentioned this a few weeks ago. You're finally done the thing that I know most of you were waiting for, the thing that's sort of kind of maybe kept you from giving. We switched to push pay.
Here's my final serenade. Here's a gun and here's a blade. Here's a picture that I saved too long. Here's my credit card and key, and the reason I won't find peace. Here's a song I should not complete too long. Here's my pride and here's my shame. Here's a trophy that bears my name. Here's all the mistakes I made too long. Here's the answers I never gave. Here's the calls I should have made. Here's the substance that I crave all along. Here's my vision, here's my aim, my dress and the ones I blame. While you're sitting taking names, I just want to belong. Here's my lonely serenade. Here's a gun and here's a blade. Here's a picture that I saved before you were gone. Here's my pride and here's my shame. Here's a trophy that bears my name. Here's all the mistakes I made too long. Here's the answers I never gave. Here's the calls I should have made. Here's the substance that I crave all along. Can you hold all my secrets? We swear that we can't forget. I had lies like you wouldn't believe. Brought to my knees. Here's my pride and here's my shame. Here's a trophy that bears my name. Here's all the mistakes I made for too long. Here's the answers I never gave. Here's the calls I should have made. Here's the substance that I crave all along. Here's my pride and here's my shame. Here's a trophy that bears my name. Here's all the mistakes I made too long. Here's the answers I never gave. Here's the calls I should have made. Here's the substance that I crave all along. Here's my final serenade. Here's the gun and here's the blade. Here's a picture that I saved too long.
And I'm back. So exciting for me. Equally exciting for you, I hope. So yeah, I mentioned this, but here's what we're going to do today. Some of you who have been here for a long time have been part of this before, but we are going to do a Q&A where my phone number will be on the screen. Go ahead and toss it up there. That's it. That's my real phone number. It's not a Google number. That's my actual number that is registered to me, available for you to use whenever you like, within reason, I hope. But for this morning, it's for you to text questions in. And so here is my promise to you. If I do not have time to answer every question that gets texted in live from stage, or if perhaps there's one that is going to require like a longer response that would maybe be easier for me to write out, I promise that eventually I will respond to every question. Usually when I do this, I'm able to do it by the end of the day, but because I'll be at the parade, I won't make that promise. But as soon as I possibly can, any question that doesn't get answered during our time together this morning, I will commit to answering. So a couple other ground rules, I guess, or I don't know, suggestions, parameters. There's no bad question, no wrong question. Feel free to send any question you have that even might loosely relate to Watershed or spirituality, etc., etc. But kind of like I implied a little bit earlier during the announcements, I'm going to prioritize the questions first and foremost that seem to sort of intersect with the themes of the series that we've been in. You know, sort of exploring inherited ideas within the Christian tradition with our faith more broadly that maybe don't resonate or make sense anymore, and what do we do with those things, and do we attribute some of those ideas to God or do we not? How do we reconcile that? And then specifically because it is Charlotte Pride today, I'll put even more priority towards those questions that sort of speak to the intersection of like faith, gender, sexuality, queerness, things like that. So hopefully that makes sense. But I'll dive right in. I already got a couple. Okay. I might paraphrase some of these if they're long. So if I paraphrase your question, don't be offended. Okay, here's one. They're talking about having been at Watershed for a long time, love it, have made friends here, but some of those friends have like moved on or kind of pulled back because they have felt like Watershed's entire identity is like being the gay church or the LGBTQ church. To be clear, they want me to say this. They love Watershed. They love that it's affirming and it's a safe place. But like, kind of how to navigate that feeling or that expression, whether you're someone's experiencing that themselves, or someone says that is like the reason that maybe they don't attend here anymore. So kind of to summarize, how to make sense of or make peace with a church that maybe doesn't cater to your particular identity in all given instances, either ever or anymore. That's a great question, and it's an opportunity for me to sort of like paint a picture of like who's in the room on any given Sunday. One of the things that we say from time to time is, like in preface or in kind of a new kind of person's experience, Second Sunday, if you've been to that, is like on any given Sunday, there's at least 4 types of folks in the room at a place like Watershed. If you can kind of imagine like a grid or like a quadrant of some sorts, like in one corner, you would have folks who identify as Christian, and they're good with that. And then maybe over here in the next quadrant or corner, you have folks who they identify as Christian, but for a variety of reasons or a singular reason, for whatever reason, they're not sure they want to anymore. Or maybe they do want to, but they're just not sure they can anymore. And then down here, you'll have folks who they don't identify as Christian. Maybe they once did, maybe they never did, but they've experienced something in a place like this that makes them open to it. If Christianity can mean this, then yeah, I might want to sign up for that. And then you also then have folks in the room who they don't identify as Christian, and they're good with that. They're not looking to. They're totally content with their spirituality, but they love this place. They love the community. They love having a spiritual practice, a spiritual element to their life. So all of those folks exist in the room at any given time. And with that in mind, a couple points of clarification. One, our goal or mission here is not to either explicitly or implicitly, secretly or directly move people into what we think the proper corner or quadrant is, all right? In fact, folks are going to move in and out of some of those different quadrants or those different sort of expressions, and probably some that didn't fit within those four categories that I named during their time here. Additionally, and this is kind of where the real kind of rub or complication comes in, there are folks who, like if we took like a random sampling of like those four labels or those four categories, and we kind of just really kind of got into what do those folks actually believe, there would be wild amounts of overlap between all four sections. A lot of it just kind of comes down to the label or kind of the comfort level with that. So that's kind of a broad category, but then when you get specific around things like gender and sexuality, or really any topic, it doesn't have to just be that. Because of the sheer diversity of folks in the room, there's folks showing up who have maybe, they've been part of this community for a long time, or they've been part of, just this, people use a term like deconstruction. They've been part of kind of a more progressive, inclusive, a more just and generous expression of the Christian tradition for a long time. And so, there's going to be Sundays where what we talk about kind of seems like old news. And then on that very same Sunday, there's going to be folks in the room who just got here, kind of literally or proverbially, and what we're saying on Sunday morning might seem like the most radical, and in that sense, almost terrifying thing they've ever heard, But what's terrifying for someone could be the most affirming, life-saving, encouraging thing that they either knew they needed to hear or didn't know they needed to hear. And so to talk about like gender and sexuality in particular, there's folks who have been affirming, LGBTQIA affirming before they knew what that term was. And there's folks who, they're not even sure if they're there yet. Maybe their heart is outpacing their head, so to speak. Or they still have questions, but they're kind of willing to belong before they believe, so to speak. And so on any given Sunday, regardless of the topic, we're trying to do our best to kind of meet everyone where they're at. I say this jokingly, but seriously, like we're winning here if all of you are just a little bit disappointed. Like we don't want to like completely let anyone down entirely, but if everyone's just a little bit not getting what they want, then that probably means we're kind of striking the appropriate balance. And I'll say one more thing on this. I would encourage anyone who doesn't feel themselves sort of seen or centered or whatever kind of terminology that you might want to use within conversations around an identity that you're not a part of, I would invite you to see that as a kind of invitation. So this could be any kind of queer identity. It could be, if we're leaning into topics around anti-racism or, different ways that people experience themselves in their bodies, whatever the topic may be. All of these are an opportunity to do at least two things. The first thing, of course, is to, shine a light on folks who have been othered, marginalized, instances of injustice, and to call for affirmation and inclusion and dignity and things like that. So that's the obvious low-hanging fruit where I think sometimes if someone doesn't feel themselves sort of seen within the conversation, they kind of wonder what's here for them. But there's another piece to this, and I'll use queer identity as my example here. The gift of queerness as it relates to gender and sexuality is the way that it gives us sort of an image or a model to look at when it comes to the way in which all forms of like normative existence and normative identity are oppressive. Another example that we talk about here a lot would be patriarchy. Like patriarchy sucks, and the sorts of masculinity that is embodied and encouraged within patriarchy, of course and quite obviously, they're problematic for women and folks who don't kind of fit in our gender binary. But patriarchy's bad for men too. And if, myself and my fellow men, can't see that, if we, if there's a frustration, oh, you guys are talking about patriarchy so much, I don't know how to show up as a straight white dude. I get it, but you're missing something. And so kind of on the same thing when it comes to queer identity, you might not identify as LGBTQIA or queer or anything like that, but there is a gift to be received in seeing the ways in which the experience of LGBTQ folks in our world sort of shines a light on the way that all of these sort of normative systems can be oppressive. In the same ways that shining a light on instances of racial injustice can show us the ways in which, for those of us who occupy what we might call whiteness, that's not good for us either. So I could talk for our rest of the time on this topic. I think this is, I'm just scratching the surface here, but that's what I would say to all of us. Anytime you're here and it's kind of oh, that didn't speak to me directly, there's a good chance it was probably speaking to you at least indirectly. And that's kind of what I would invite everyone into. I hope that made sense. I was kind of all over the place, but here's the next one. How do you handle questions from other Christians like, do you even believe the Bible, for supporting LGBTQIA folks, rethinking hell, etc.? It's a good, yeah. So the first thing I do, and I have to fight myself internally, because what I want to do is do the personal embodied version. If you've seen Parks and Recreation, there's a scene where Nick Offerman's character Ron Swanson walks into a hardware store, and as soon as the helper dude comes up, he kind of cuts him off and he says, "Son, I know more than you." And I say this with not a lick of humility. Generally speaking, when I get questions like that, well, I know more than they do. But that's not helpful, all right? That's not helpful. So that's not the answer I want you to walk away with. So there's a few things to point out here. The first is, here's one more tongue-in-cheek thing, and then I'll try to give you the serious answer. The one more tongue-in-cheek thing, and I say this every time we do a talk in our Mark series, but we have been walking through the book of Mark for a year and a half now. By the time we finish, it's going to be 2 full years in the book of Mark. That's more than every person in this country not named John MacArthur when it comes to books of the Bible. So you can tell them that we are very biblical here. And that's not really tongue-in-cheek. I am kind of serious about that. We engage the Bible in just about every talk or sermon or series that we do. But here's what I think the question is actually getting at. And so we're going to get nerdy real quick here. I apologize. Oftentimes when people are asking that question, they want what we might call a proof text. They want you to show them where in the Bible it says that X, Y, or Z is okay or falls within the boundaries of Christianity or whatever. And so that can sometimes be a tough question to answer, because for many of us who have sort of been on this journey for a long time, that's not how we understand the Bible to work anymore. And I think we're on really solid ground in that. Oftentimes, I'll tell folks that things like, you maybe heard the term inerrancy or infallibility around kind of the Bible having no contradictions or no errors or anything like that. And I would tell people, and again, this is a little tongue-in-cheek, but I think it's true, that's not a biblical position. The Bible itself speaks against reading the Bible that way. But again, that can also sometimes be not helpful. So I think the first thing to do, if you're in a conversation like this, is to figure out what the person you're talking to is looking for, all right? If they are someone for whom the Bible works in a certain way, it's basically God's divine user manual for creation, and, we kind of need to follow it and kind of make all of our decisions based on what it says. As an aside, I would say it's a terrible user manual. But more specifically, there absolutely are ways of interpreting the Bible through that lens that are fully affirming of and fully inclusive of LGBTQ folks, for example, or when it comes to things like heaven and hell, a lot of the traditions that we got handed, you could kind of do the whole proof text thing and show folks where the error of their ways, so to speak. Now, it would be a much longer conversation that we don't have time for this morning for me to go through like every possible example. But I could if I needed to, and you could too. The resources are there, I guess. The resources are there for you to have what's called an evangelical hermeneutic. And hermeneutic is just a fun word, which is like your lens of interpretation. So the material's there. But what I would invite you, whoever you are, not just the person who asked the question, but I think this is probably a pretty relatable question. What I would invite all of us into is a different, what I might call a better way of reading the Bible. And there's a lot of great books on that, including one called Better Ways of Reading the Bible by my friend Zach Lambert, which you can buy where books are sold. And there's others too. Pete Enns, Rob Bell, Rachel Held Evans. There's a ton of great books out there, and all of them are kind of pointing at the same basic thing, which is when you actually let the Bible be what it was always intended to be, a lot of the messiness becomes a feature, not a bug, in a good way. For those of you who have been to Preface, Matt, I think it's usually like the third or fourth night. I think it's the third night usually. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Matt will ask a question. On a scale of 1 to 5 at this stage in your spiritual journey, how important is the Bible to you? And when I used to be able to go to Preface, and if you don't know what Preface is, it's sort of like our new person's experience to kind of get a better sense of what this place is. When I used to be able to go more often, I would try to like kind of feel out in the room, like what would be the most scandalously disruptive answer that I could give as a pastor here to that question. So if I kind of had a sense that the room was like, the Bible was still like really, really important to them, I'd be like 1, and people were like, oh, And then if it was a bunch of people who were like already kind of all deconstruction-y and stuff like that, and they're like 0, then I'd be like 5, and they'd be like, oh, I kind of got over myself and I don't do that anymore. But the point is, for me at least, it's kind of both. Because when I was growing up, I was told the Bible worked a certain way. I was told that it all harmonizes together and it's God's divine text message to us and basic instructions before leaving earth, if you heard that cliche. And I remember as a kid, and I didn't always have like the language for this, but I would look at it and I'd be like, this? Really? This is the best that a perfect, all-powerful God could do? This thing's a mess. Like 2/3 of it are incredibly boring. A lot of it is wildly inappropriate from like an age, level standpoint. And I was being fed this at a very young age. And then some of it just doesn't make sense. It's a mess. However, once I was able to kind of come to understand the Bible on its own terms, so first off, it came out of a Jewish tradition that is all about arguing with and wrestling with the authority of, just all authority, but particularly the authority of the text, that the contradictions are sort of like the internal debates that the text itself is having is actually exactly how it was meant to be understood. Even understanding that the original audience and the original authors didn't see it as like God like transcending human time and history, just kind of say things specifically for 20th century Americans. Like once the Bible is sort of allowed to like work on its terms, then a lot of these kind of proof text oriented questions, there's not really an answer to them because you realize that that's the wrong question. Now, is this necessarily effective for, your antagonistic aunt or uncle who's like pinging you up on Facebook every time you say something like plausibly progressive? No. I'm sorry. That, again, longer conversation. But what it'll at least give you is peace of mind so that when they're coming at you, with their hellfire and brimstone threatening insinuations, you're not going to lose sleep over it anymore. So I would start there. And again, I listed some resources. I'm happy to text those to you directly. You specifically, whoever sent this question. But that's where I would start. It really kind of comes down to, the question beneath the question is, how do you read the Bible? How does this work? Insofar as this is authoritative at all, what would that look like? Start there. What else do we got? That's a question for later. How do you know if something is God or if it's just a great thing that happened? That is a good question. A little bit, and this is going to be a little bit of a cop-out, but I promise you I'll ramble on about it in a moment after I sort of give this. Matt, a couple weeks ago as part of this series, did what I thought was a great talk. I hope you all agree. But Matt, if you're in here, I thought it was a great talk. Where he kind of got into and he explored like the story of Abraham and Isaac, where he has to like sacrifice his son, but then he doesn't. Which, if you really think about it, kind of a problematic story. But ultimately, it was a talk about what does it mean to talk about or to imagine that God intervenes in the world in certain ways. Because I think sometimes if we really sort of play out the assumption or the implication that God is interventionist in the way that many of us were taught growing up, it can get uncomfortable fast. I'm no better than any of you. I have also thanked God when, like, pretty much any time I'm trying to park at a Trader Joe's, and that goes a little smoother than anticipated. And then, but or like when the weather was good. Like, I'm kind of angry at God right now that it's not cloudy today because we're doing something awesome. Maybe there'll be a rainbow though. That'll really stick it to him, But what I'm getting at here is when you really stop and think about the implications of like God almost like selectively intervening on this but not that, or that but not this. Again, the idea that God like really, really cares about the weather for your youth baseball game, but is going to allow ongoing genocides in places like Gaza or India or parts of Africa and things like that, like, that's icky. Okay, so how do we imagine God's, presence in the world without, kind of just throwing up our hands in exasperation over kind of just ethical, moral realities like that? There's not like a one-size-fits-all way. So just here's a few examples of ways that I think some people who are really, really smart and really, really good at talking about God have imagined it, One is, there's a tradition, broadly speaking, called open and relational theology. Some of you might be familiar with this. This would include things like, there's a term called open theism. This would include different what are called like process theological traditions. Oftentimes it just gets called open and relational theology. But the basic idea here is, and there's strong biblical merit for a lot of this, that God's relationship in the world is not exhaustively sovereign in the sense of like being able to like meticulously and, this is crucial, coercively control everything. But God's relationship to the world is more, either more persuasive or at least self-limiting. Like, whether by definition of what it means to be God or in God's all-powerful decision, God is limited in some way when it comes to sort of directly kind of like influencing the events of the world. And this can be really helpful if you're trying to make sense of literally any human atrocity that you can think of throughout human history, but also, some of the natural, like earthquake, hurricane style, tragedies that happen. So, and there is a robust tradition exploring this. I mean, we've done book clubs and stuff like that with authors like Tripp Fuller and Gregory Boyd and Tom Ord and things like that. So if that resonates, I would encourage you to explore that. Another, again, there's numerous kind of directions you could take this, but another way of thinking about it really sort of gets into the question of like, what do we mean by God? Because I think usually, even when we kind of know better, we're often imagining God, or at least I was growing up, and maybe you're the same, kind of like the way that like Zeus was portrayed in Disney's Hercules. Like jovial, but like old and masculine, and kind of just like a bigger, more powerful, maybe more loving, but often just as judgy, but like just kind of inflated version of what a human is. And I would even say that open and relational tradition that I talked about, like even that sort of projects at times kind of more, the official term would be anthropomorphic, kind of humanistic sort of characteristics of God, although often metaphorically. But if you really kind of get into the depth of not just the Christian tradition, but the Jewish tradition, and I would extend this to other Abrahamic faiths like Islam and non-Abrahamic faiths, so Hinduism and certain indigenous spiritualities, oftentimes the notion of God's being is much less sort of just like a super, super, super duper awesome human, with powers and stuff. And it's more of an essence, dare I say a force, or a field, a spirit, kind of something sort of embedded within the very fabric of reality. And there's maybe a personal aspect to it, but the way in which that, that divinity interacts with the world is not like the way that we interact with each other, where like I might intervene in your existence by calling you on the phone, or, meeting you for coffee, or pushing you off a swing or something. I don't know. Where we like we have to like interrupt one another's existence. It's competitive, as opposed to sort of collaborative, if that makes sense. And so again, this is not a radical idea. In fact, this notion of God, God is more of like the ground of all being. This is actually the most ancient notion of God, at least within the Christian tradition, and also kind of where the Jewish tradition had arrived, broadly speaking, around the time of Christ. And so, again, I'm not doing it justice in my, rambling and short amount of time up here, but I guess what I'd say is just know that, like, the idea of God and the way that God's sovereignty and control of the world or interaction with the world works kind of in the way that most of us were handed it within kind of like American evangelicalism is actually pretty new, pretty novel, pretty young within the long Christian tradition. Christianity, over its 2,000-year history, has other notions of God's being, which are, I don't want to like say, like wave it away and say just, it solves all of our problems. But some of the contradictions or sort of confusions that maybe we inherited within our tradition, they are, I think, addressed better when you're able to kind of get into the depth and breadth of it. I've told folks this before, I've mentioned this term a couple times, deconstruction. People talk about deconstructing their faith, and I totally affirm that. And if you're someone who for whatever your experiences within Christianity are, that you kind of felt like or feel like you need to sort of deconstruct and find out what is outside of Christianity in order to still have a spirituality or no spirituality, that's fine too. Like, I totally respect that. For me, just speaking for myself, it never felt like I needed to leave Christianity, because what instead happened is I just learned more about the depth and breadth of the Christian tradition beyond and outside and before evangelicalism. And I have yet to find anything that just doesn't fit somewhere within the 2,000-year history of Christianity. So again, no one needs to feel bound by this. At the end of the day, it's just a label. From the very beginning, always, there has never been a singular unified thing that is Christianity. There has only always ever been a plurality of Christianities trying to make sense of this experience and encounter with Jesus. So you are on very safe, and I would even argue biblical ground, kind of being all over the place within this. Also, by the way, literally no one depicted in the Bible is a Christian. They're all Jewish or pagan or something. Christianity came later. It's a term that we've used to sort of retroactively apply to the various kind of streams and shoots of things that are, again, trying to make sense of this encounter with Jesus. So be a Christian, don't be a Christian, but feel permission to explore other both ancient and novel ways of conceiving of the being of God and how that God interacts with the world. All righty. Now they're coming. Lot of questions now. How do you elevator pitch to your traditional evangelical family that maybe hell isn't the fire pit we are all raised to believe it is, and the Bible may not be literal in that sense or any sense? Okay. My cop-out answer is to read Brian Recker's book, Rethinking Hell. It's great. If you want something a little bit more pretentious and academic, read David Bentley Hart's book, That All Might Be Saved, which Brian cites in his book. But my guess is that your evangelical family won't read those books, although they should. They're great. Here's what I would try. Massive disclaimer. This might not work. It hasn't worked with my family, but I'm going to tell you anyway. My approach is, the first thing is before I can show them that what I believe is maybe more biblical, I think demonstrating that what they believe isn't biblical can be helpful. And not everyone's trained to do that, but we were born in the time of the internet. So we have more resources at our fingertips than 99% of all humans who have ever lived throughout history. And you have my phone number now, so I'm happy to give you like more direct resources as needs arise. But there are so many things, hell just being just one of them, where what we inherited, you can sort of reverse engineer it historically and see how people came up with that for practical political reasons, more so than anything rooted in the Bible. There are so many silly ideas attributed to God, which I'm going to just be generous and say that they were innocently developed because people were bad at translating. Some of you have maybe played the telephone game. I think the existence of, ironically, cell phones have made this game kind of go away because youths have more to do in their free time than do you all know what I'm talking about with the telephone game? Okay, cool. All right. That's kind of often how translation works. By the time, the New Testament version that we have, especially when a lot of these doctrines were solidified, hundreds or thousands of years ago, we have a more complete Bible now than they had then, if that makes sense. We have access to better manuscripts, better translation techniques. The literacy rate is way higher. There's all these historical contextual factors that you can sort of just easily deconstruct what was going on when certain things kind of got landed. You can look into the politics of church history and kind of who stood to win if this particular camp's pet theological position became the standardized thing that got stuck into a creed. I will say this, speaking of creeds, generally speaking, regardless of your tradition, with the exception of some, wannabe edgelord evangelicals who think, something about creeds are icky and silly, the people who wrote the Apostles' Creed, maybe, but definitely the Nicene Creed, the one thing that kind of unifies Christian traditions across Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and the various Protestant traditions, the creeds, written by Universalists, people who didn't think everyone ends up in hell for eternity. Augustine, one of the most famous Christian theologians, he himself sort of at fault for popularizing certain notions of hell in Christian history, in his own writings acknowledged that many of his peers, other bishops and theologians who he respected, also didn't believe in hell. It's also not really difficult to sort of trace the origins of the kind of Christian notion of hell from a whole bunch of other traditions that the people who believe in hell from a Christian standpoint wouldn't give the, time of day to. Our notion of hell is deeply Greek with strong Persian influences and things like that. You can reverse engineer the thing. So again, have I been successful? Moderately at best. But if you really have someone who's genuinely curious, someone who really is wanting to wrestle and engage with some of these ideas, then yeah, the more you explore the depth and breadth of the Christian tradition, the more the very narrow expression of Christianity championed by evangelicalism becomes untenable. So, in a weird kind of ironic way, at least for me, I got warned against going to seminary, like Christian grad school, because like it would turn me liberal or whatever. It did. So that's another thing. And you know, my parents sometimes struggle to wrap their heads around this. I'm here today because I just kept reading the Bible. And by here today, I mean like at a church like Watershed. It wasn't like the malevolent forces of secularism. It was Christianity that made me a progressive, inclusive person who's going to go to the Pride Parade later. Like, the Bible did that, okay? So, like, you don't have to, abandon your faith in order to be a decent human being. I've got time for one more, and so we prepared for, like, me to be long-winded, and Austin, no closing song. I'm going to just wrap it up on my own. So I'm not going to get to all of these, all right? So as promised, I will circle back. Okay. I'm going to ask this one because it's from someone's daughter. And it could be an adult daughter, but I'm just imagining that it's like a child. And so I'm going to prioritize the child. It says this: how did God create the world in 7 days, and he made humans last? And in the Bible, they never mentioned that he made dinosaurs, and dinosaurs became before humans. So, great question. If you're new here, I love dinosaurs. I was going to tangent. Anyway, okay, so if an adult asked that question, my first answer would be, how did God create the earth in 7 days? God didn't. That's a poem. Also, it's a poem that directly contradicts the second creation story that happens just one chapter later. And by the way, we added those chapters later. Really, and I think this is key. It kind of gets back to some of the Bible stuff we were talking about a moment ago. The Bible wasn't written linearly. The Bible that we have was sort of compiled, redacted, which means like edited and sort of recompiled over many years. Most of what we have is in what we call the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, was probably put together in a version somewhat similar to what we have now during the period of Babylonian and Persian exile, which is something that chronologically in the story happens pretty late, but that's kind of the origin. So the book of Genesis that we have probably emerged in sort of a coherent written form at that time or around that time. And it combines at least probably 2 to 4 often competing sources that were kind of stitched together and harmonized together after the fact. And even that sense of harmonization is not quite as clean as our English translations make it appear. All right, so I just said a lot there. Again, internet, use it. Or read some of those books that I talked about, in which I can text you about. But the big takeaway here is that, like, even the creation narratives that we have contradict each other. Now, when it comes to how I would attempt, I'm not always good at putting the cookies on the bottom shelf, if you couldn't tell. But how I might explain that to a kid would be using things like story, poetry, and this is a question for everyone. It's rhetorical. You don't have to yell it out. Like, what is your favorite fictional story? Because here's the thing about fiction. Sometimes fiction can feel truer than, like, nonfiction, in the sense that oftentimes it requires things like fictional prose or poetry to communicate something so transcendentally true that simple history doesn't capture it. There's a renowned late theologian named Marcus Borg, who I think I'm right in attributing this to him, said that the Bible is true and some of it actually happened. And that's a wonderful quote, because I do think it captures the broader spirit of how the Bible works. The Bible is folks from a variety of cultures, all of which are ancient, And so had a very different sense, a world picture than us, very different assumptions about just the very nature of reality, so much so that we probably don't even have categories for the way in which they saw the world. And yet, there is a through line between them and us, insofar as they were encountering the same sense of the transcendent, the same questions about the nature of reality, and encounters with things that they could only assume or call or label divine. You know, Matt has talked about this before. You've maybe seen it on Instagram if you follow the comedian Pete Holmes. He's one of the foundational Petes here at Watershed, along with Enns and Rollins. You're obviously not familiar with these people, but you'll hear more about them later. But Pete Holmes is a comedian, and he's quoting a guy named Barry Taylor, who is kind of this eclectic semi-academic, but who also was once like the road manager for the band AC/DC. And Pete is quoting Barry. This is getting confusing. I'm just name dropping now. But what Pete says is that God is the name for the blanket that we put over the mystery to give it shape. People have been wrestling with that mystery for all of human history, and the Bible is a compilation of people in a very ancient and alien context to ours, wrestling with those very same existential questions that we're wrestling with today. And so engaging it invites us into a conversation with them, which is really a conversation with the whole of humanity. And in that sense, it is both inspired and inspiring, but it doesn't work the way many of us were taught. And so you have to come in and allow the text to be weird, and allow it to disrupt you in the ways that something really, really weird and alien and unexpected would. Because it's precisely in that disruption that I think you are sort of most present to kind of this universal experience of the divine, this alienating but at the same time welcoming mystery that kind of places us outside of ourselves and into something greater. I think so often we get it exactly wrong in that we seek religion, kind of seek certainties around God and the world in order to sort of like shore ourselves up, make ourselves feel more secure in our existence. And I think the invitation of all true spirituality is exactly the opposite. It's a good alienation. It's an invitation to contradiction and a kind of holy corruption. And I realize I'm now saying things that you probably don't want to tell the 7-year-old who asked about dinosaurs and the Bible. I think my simple answer there would be like, don't be afraid of what you're going to inevitably learn in the public school system. And there's no reason why God couldn't have been intimately involved with all of those messy biological processes first popularized by one Charles Darwin. Anyway, I'm all over the place, and I'm over my time. Just as a reminder, we would love to see you at the parade. I will be in the back for a few minutes if you've got any questions or curiosities about that. And then crucially, if I didn't have time to get to your question today, like from stage, when I get some margin, either later this afternoon or tomorrow, I will respond to every single one of those questions. And if you didn't have a chance to ask one, last chance, at least for now, you have my number. Text them in. This is like my love language, is answering obscure theological and philosophical questions. So it would literally be my favorite thing in the world if more of you would text them in. So thank you for being here. Whether we see you at the parade or not, I hope we see you next week. And grace and peace.